Hello. So welcome to week four. Just a couple of reminders before I get into the chapter four. One is make sure that when you are writing your papers, even if it's questions that you're being asked, that you always write it in an APA format. So even if your answers look like an outline, it shouldn't be the entire paper. So you should have like an introduction, like what you're doing, what the assignment is, what you were thinking about when you started to do the assignment, and then the actual activity. And then at the very end, obviously, what you learned from that activity. I want to make sure that you understand it, but also there is what I also want to see is like how you see it operating in the real world. So I always use Taylor Swift as a great example. She has a publicist that's well known in the industry. You don't talk about marketing, teams helping her. You will hear about True Pain, her publicist. So thinking about the role that a publicist will play, that's what somebody in PR is. When, you hire a company, a PR company to help you manage things, that's what you're hiring, is you're hiring a publicist who learns a lot about you and your company and your brand and helps you message that out to the media. So this is not social media, even though this book I'm not quite happy with this book, and I haven't found a PR book out there that I like because a lot of these treat PR like it's English. Look at the last assignment that we had, right? It was a compare contrast between general writing and today and PR writing, which is still significant. It does tell you that there's a different style of writing, but today we're talking about the right message and the right medium. So please make sure that you are writing in APA format when you do all your assignments. So the one highlight I would give you is so when you think about public relations itself is under the fourth P of marketing, promotions. So under promotions is public relations, advertising and digital media, and sales. Okay. So you're going to read on page 49, and I do buy textbooks. I mean, I get these textbooks as the instructor, but if there are textbooks like my psych class that I took last semester, I bought the book. Or I printed out the PDF of the class because I like to be able to take notes. And it's also good. You put it in a library, it's something that you can keep for later, especially when you need reference. Um, but anyhow, so the process of persuasion is on page 49, and I want you to think about that in terms of sales. But in sales, you're talking to an audience of buyers. Here, you're talking to an audience of the media. So TV, radio, um, podcasters, print, the publishers that you might get there. That's a little bit on the advertising side, but in print, you have journalists, right? So that is also the media. So, I want you to think in terms of like how you need to create a strategy that's going to sell your company or a person. So when I say a person, think about a celebrity like a Taylor Swift. Um, and how does Tree Payne go about talking to the media as messaging that helps put Taylor always in a good light, even though sometimes I think some of the things that she does gets hidden very well by her publicist of things that she does, and I'll tell you about that in a second. So we'll go through persuasive strategies. So there's the compliance strategy, um, sanction strategy. So go through and make sure that you understand these different strategies that you can use. And because it becomes really important that before you ever talk to the media, that you have the strategy for the issue that you have at hand, um, you have it locked in. So you may do a branding that your company wants to have branded, which means I want my company's name to get out there for something positive. Okay. That's, something that you would look to these strategies to how you do that. There's also, that's a branding campaign where you're using PR. There's also messaging. like I'm or my company is doing something very interesting and I want to broadcast that item out. So let's just say, um, looking at Taylor Swift, for example, every time she goes into a city, she always donates money to the food bank. Okay, that leaks out to the press, who then publishes it through anonymous sources and all this other stuff. So you have that gets out. So you, as the publicist, either put out something public as the publicist, right? So Tree Payne sometimes will go on the record of saying, "Hey, this is what's going on." And then there's sometimes you don't, as a publicist, you leak that information out, like, "Hey, we've got this thing coming up and we don't want to make it a big deal, but I just want to let you know in case you want to write an article about it." So that's how anonymous sources work, which I struggle with anonymous sources because we have a lot of media that rely on people that are not qualified, who may only have half of the answer, may not really know what's going on, but will leak a piece of information that out of context doesn't really fit. And that's the problem with these sources. So you'll see sometimes with Taylor Swift that Tree Payne will go on the record and put out a statement on behalf of Taylor, which means that we've talked behind the scenes. This is the way we want to approach it. Um, and then, be able to do that. The great, I would highly recommend, I think it's on either Netflix or Amazon. It's called Miss Americana. It's the documentary on Taylor Swift. And there's a scene in there where she's sitting there with her mom, her dad, and her brother, who are part of her team and her marketing team, and Tree Payne discussing Taylor's decision to sponsor a political candidate. It was somebody running for a state office in Tennessee. And you have her dad talking about, hey, I just had to hire security because, there's really scary things that are coming and death threats and all that kind of stuff. And Taylor's like, this is what I want to do. I want to go on the record and say this. So once she makes that decision to go on the record, then there's a whole strategy on how you put that out there and what media sources that you use. So then on page 57, it talks about choosing the appropriate medium or media. So medium can be social media, right? You can put it out on social media on a platform. You can put it out to the actual media, the journalists that are out there. And I struggle with the word journalists because if you knew what I knew about how poorly they research and how poorly they write, it's tragic. It is tragic what's happened to our media. So it really becomes involved the publicist to ask for a copy of what's going to go out before it goes out to proof it. I mean, I always say to people I know who work in the media, I'm like, if I find a typo in your work, I don't even, you've lost all credibility. And I get the excuses of, oh, you don't know, we work on short time frames. And I'm like, hey, use Grammarly. We have technology that can make sure that before you publish something, that you have done your due diligence. So there's so much sloppiness out there, and you have to know that as a publicist, right? Because what you put out there in a press release or as a social media post, you don't know how it will trickle down. So, just to kind of leave you with this thought, I just did a video that's picking up some steam on my Instagram and on TikTok about Taylor Swift. And one of the things I said, Taylor's all good about dropping Easter eggs, for example, and that's her gig. But I said that with my lens of knowing what goes on behind the scenes, that, and I haven't heard anybody say this, that her album, The Life of a Showgirl, was actually the ultimate Easter egg. And the reason why I know that is because that there is a cycle on which you drop albums. With coming off a big tour, usually artists go quiet. They don't want to overexpose their brand, but she didn't. She goes right into Dead Poet Society, the Eras Tour, and then launching Life of a Showgirl. And I know why. It's for the song Canceled. She knew that Blake Lively's lawsuit was going to release her text messages and make her look like the mean girl that she is or can be. So the song Canceled has in one of the emails she mentioned Justin Baldoni getting out his little violin. In Canceled, she said, never bring a little violin to a knife fight. Okay. So that song, I Like My Friends Canceled, is her crisis PR communication to her audience through an Easter egg to say, hey, I canceled Blake Lively. Don't even put me in that mess. Right. So that's how she chose to do that. Now, I can tell you that they're going to have to do more damage control because they came out and said, Tree Payne came out and said, Taylor Swift was not involved in the film. She did not go on set. She did not do this. She did not do that. And yet, the text messages say that she was very involved in getting somebody fired, um, promoting Blake Lively's version of the script so that to manipulate Justin Baldoni with pressure. She was very involved in that making of that movie and supporting Blake making that movie and hijacking it from Baldoni. So right now you're not hearing Tree Payne respond to that. You're just not, because that's their strategy. And that is ultimately the strategy that you have to think about. There's all these different strategies, and sometimes silence works for you, and sometimes it doesn't. The biggest example I can give you of it doesn't was Bud Light. When Bud Light, the whole controversy happened with Bud Light, that whole communication team, PR and company shut down. Nobody addressed the issues. And you watched it escalate, right? People going out and shooting the cans of Bud Light to get rid of them, saying, I'm never going to buy it again. And instead of addressing it with PR and crisis PR, they just let it ride. So there's sometimes the strategy of not saying anything, but you got to read the room and you got to know that it's unpredictable, right? You got to watch it very closely, start looking on social media for comments that people are making, and then putting out a comment about it. And I don't know that we'll see her comment on it, other than she's made moves on the front end before those text messages were released, which also included statements by her publicist. So, and those went to the media, and she's got very specific media that she works with. I think she works with People Magazine and the Daily Mail in the UK. So that's the other thing, is you got to pick the media sources, and again, you, the publicist, is developing relationships with those writers at those news organizations, so that when you want to drop something, you've got this relationship and, hey, can you drop this? And you hope that they give you favor, which means that they put out your statement just as it is and they don't do any more research. Because had those journalists done more research, they would have been already ahead of the game as to why they were being asked to put out that statement about her not being involved. And now those journalists should feel pretty bad, because they could have had the ultimate investigative journalist research and story that could have made their career if they had started asking questions about why Tree Payne was dropping that information, and could there have been more to the story than what you heard. Now, I will tell you, people on social media, some of the influencers had already figured it out. And that's the other thing too. You can partner with influencers on social media and have them drop content, for access. So there's so many different ways to approach PR. And that's what I want you to understand as you go through this chapter, is that you really need to sit down, just like you're doing a marketing plan. When you're doing your marketing, you really need to sit down and create a PR strategy, either for your company and branding, or for a very specific situation, whether you're partnering with a charity, or we'll get into crisis PR in the last half of the class, and we'll talk about more about that. But, again, thinking about addressing issues that you want to address, like Taylor getting involved in commenting about politics, that would be an example. So enjoy this week reading this. Again, this is the fun part about PR, is kind of building that strategy. And once you put it out there, obviously it's on its own and you got to kind of figure that out. But that's the damage control. That's watching it doing. So all this planning you do up front is critical to a successful PR campaign. So I will see you next week. Make sure if you've got any questions, you send me emails. And again, make sure you're always writing in APA format. Have a great day.